applause for, this facility and the fact that well, we're very fortunate today to have Bill Burke, and I'd like to tell you what he does, but he does so many things, it's hard to kind of focus it down. But his main connection here, of course, was as a quarterback playing for Nick Saban. I don't know how many of you remember Nick Saban, but he was a coach here, and a very successful one, and you're going to hear that story and a whole lot more. But to introduce Bill Burke, I'm going to bring up the head of sports at Channel 6, Ian Chris.
Thanks, Chris. You stole what I was going to say, though, so I don't have as much anymore. Bill Burke is our keynote speaker tonight. Those that don't know, he was the quarterback at Michigan State from 1995 to 1999. He was the quarterback of the Michigan State team who went down to Columbus and upset the top-ranked Buckeyes. Led by Nick Saban. He threw for over 300 yards, and then the next year he did something not a lot of people in their lives can say. He took down Tom Brady. Threw for 400 yards in the game, and I think Brady had like 3-something. So he outplayed Tom Brady, which obviously not many people can say nowadays. So after his playing days came to an end, he transitioned into becoming an author, and he wrote the book Victory Outside the Arena, which is dedicated to athletes and what they do after they're done playing their sport. He's also a certified performance coach, and I'm sure it's all stuff he's going to get into up here. So with that being said, we'll bring up Bill.
Well, thanks, Ian, for that introduction, and thank you all for being here. I'd like to start by saying thank you to the Michigan Business Network, and specifically Chris Holman for the invitation. Anytime I get invited to speak on two of my favorite passions, sports and business, I jump at the chance because there is so much overlap between the two of those things. And I've really been thinking a lot about how they are much more alike than they are different. And so, in any endeavor, it's my belief, and especially ultimately in life, I think that success is based really on not having all the answers, but asking the right questions. And so one of the questions that I've been pondering a lot since Chris's invitation is, and it's really a big question when you really think about it, because this is such a big deal, and it was such a big part of my life, and continues to be a big part of my life. But that question is, why do we really love sports? I mean, why do we really love sports? I think it's more about the championships and the rivalries. It's certainly more about scores and stats. I think it's more about bragging rights. I think the real reason that we like sports and we love it so much is because we want to feel something. We want to feel something very, very specific. And yes, we want to see who wins the game on Saturdays and Sundays. But as we are cheering for those athletes, I think at the same time we are cheering for that version of ourselves that we know that we could be if we had that same fight, that same belief, and that same courage. The themes like struggle and sacrifice and teamwork and triumph and defeat, all those things are absolutely sports themes. But at the same time, on a deeper level, they are actually human themes. And that's something that we respect about sports, and also in business as well. I think we love sports because they remind us that greatness is not just reserved for the select few, but it's actually within reach for each and every one of us. So my love affair with sports, and specifically football, began the old-fashioned way. Many, many years ago on my parents' carpet in their living room in Western Pennsylvania, watching this big floor model TV, Chris knows what I'm talking about, looked more like a piece of furniture than an actual TV set. Now this, as I mentioned, was south of Pittsburgh, and I was a little kid at the time. I think we had 3 channels, but the Pittsburgh Steelers at that time were absolutely everything. And if you know anything about football, in the late 70s, the Pittsburgh Steelers were winning Super Bowl after Super Bowl after Super Bowl. And for my life at that time, in the little Western Pennsylvania town, the black and gold were not just colors. I mean, they were really a part of the entire city's identity. And if you remember those teams, Bobby, maybe you do, Jack Lambert, Terry Bradshaw, Franco Harris, Lynn Swann, Mean Joe Green. I was hooked right from the very beginning. And not only that, but I couldn't wait to actually participate in that type of same emotion that I saw on the television screen each and every Sunday. So at that point, life took a little bit of a turn. We moved across the border into Ohio, and that is where I actually got my first chance to play organized football. It's where I put on a helmet for the first time. It's where I put on shoulder pads for the first time. It's where I got tackled for the first time. And it's also where I threw my first touchdown pass for the very first time. Now, it wasn't lost on me that participating was much more than just observing. Because when we go to games, we're not just participants, or I'm sorry, we're not just spectators, we're actually participants in the emotion of that game. So I played every season, and that's really one of my favorite things about sports, is that there's always the next season. There's always another opportunity to prove yourself. And so I played every season, and then midway through my sophomore year in high school, I finally got the call that I was going to start my very first varsity game. And I was thrilled. We were going on the road to play a big Division I powerhouse, and I was a little nervous, to be honest with you. We didn't win the football game, but I ended up throwing for 245 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, after I came off the field, after one of them, one of my teammates was jumping up and down. He was more excited than I was. And he was slapping me on the helmet, and he said, "Man, colleges are going to be all over you." And I looked at him a little confused, and I didn't realize what he meant. I had no idea what a scholarship was, or how the heroes that I watched on Saturday afternoon on TV actually got to that point. And I was enthralled by how the mechanics of getting to that point actually occurred. Fast forward a little bit, I was sitting in class a few weeks after that particular game, my sophomore year. In walked a teacher and handed me an envelope. And at the top of that envelope, in the corner, was a big green block S. And underneath it, it said, Michigan State football. And I opened up the letter, and it was a recruiting letter, and it was signed by the head coach of Michigan State at the time. His name was George Perlis. And I didn't know it at the time, because I was still pretty young and uninformed about the whole football world. But George Perlis was actually the defensive coordinator for those those Pittsburgh Steelers Super Bowl teams, and the architect of the Steel Curtain defense. And so that same guy that had helped build those teams and capture my heart as a kid was now sending me a letter. And even though a couple more years went by and I got many more letters and a lot of interest from many more schools, I ended up signing with Michigan State for a different coach that you might have heard of, Nick Saban. And it was one of the best decisions that I ever made. So fast forward to my time at Michigan State. And man, I feel blessed to have had such great experiences there. Ian mentioned a couple of those. Like in 1998, when we went on the road to Columbus and beat the #1 Ohio State Buckeyes. Now, for those of you that don't remember that game or aren't football fans, we were 4 touchdown underdogs, 28 points. And this was late November or mid-November, so it had been established that Ohio State was definitively the best team in the entire country at that point. This wasn't a preseason ranking where it was up in the air about who's going to be the best team in the land that year. So that game got off to a pretty good start. We were hanging with them. It was in the third quarter. We were only down by 7. We were down by a score of 17-9 when I made an enormous mistake. Third quarter, I throw an interception. It gets returned for a touchdown. And I am so upset with myself because I realized that I might have just cost us the actual game. So I come off the field, and I'm so upset with myself. Coach Saban, who's on the sideline, actually grabs my arm because he wanted me to stop and talk to him. He wanted to give me a little coaching tip. But in an angry state, I ripped my arm away from him and actually just continued straight to the bench. And he didn't follow me, he didn't chase me, he slowly and calmly turned back to the field and continued coaching the game. through the contribution of a lot of great players that day, we actually ended up pulling out the upset. And as they would say in the newspapers, we shocked the college football world. And we did it collectively as a team with a lot of great performances from my teammates. The celebration in that locker room in Columbus, Ohio is like none other that I've ever been a part of. I've never seen, to that point, a coach hug a player. That was the norm in this locker room after this upset. And number two, as I turned around, I whipped around at one point, and Coach Saban was standing there with his arms open, facing me, and he planted a huge kiss on my cheek. It's not something that I had ever experienced or seen from him in all the years that I was around him. Now, that plane ride back was on another level, and the celebration continued well into the evening and the early morning. So fast forward, the very next day, we went through our typical Sunday routine where we come into the building about 11 o'clock just to make sure everybody's accounted for, to make sure everybody's in one piece, just to get the blood flowing a little bit. We stretch, we jog a little bit just to make sure that, you know, we're all in one piece and functioning well. Coach Saban comes up to the group at the end just to address us, tell us what to expect in the coming week. Nothing too major. And then we spend the rest of the day on Sunday relaxing, recovering, and actually watching a little NFL football as well. No big deal. The following morning, which is now Monday morning, we do our typical routine again. Even though we just upset the #1 team in the country, we didn't get the day off or the morning off. So we come into the building at 6:45. We come in to watch the film from the previous weekend's game, like we always did. So we're standing in the lobby as a team, and this is the old Duffy Doherty football building. This isn't the new monstrosity. So we're out in the lobby waiting to be called into the team meeting room, and the director of football operations comes out of the offices where the coaches are, and he says, "Hey Bill, Coach Saban wants to see you in his office." And I thought, all right, finally a pat on the back from the boss. And so I went into the offices, and he greeted me at the door. Now, if you don't know Coach Saban, when you speak to him in an office setting, he's almost inaudible. It's almost impossible to hear him because he talks so softly. And I believe, in theory, this has never been confirmed, that he conserves his energy so he can scream at the players when they're actually between the white lines. However, that was not the case in the office this day, because he tore into me. He tore into me up one side and down the other about pulling my arm away from him on the sideline. And I, of course, being a college student, 6:45 a.m., I'm still half asleep, and I am, number one, shocked, but number two, extremely apologetic and humbled at the time. The reason I tell that story is 99 out of 100 coaches would have let that slide. I firmly believe that, not just coaches, but leaders as well. 99 out of 100 would have let that slide. But here's why he did it. Because he understood that the culture of his program was the most important thing, regardless of the results. And he knew that if he had let little things like that slide, slowly but surely the fibers of his organization would have started to come apart. And it wouldn't have been noticeable in the first weeks or months or even years. But that's when you see a football team or any organization that has massive success, and then without any type of explanation or logic, it slowly starts to go down. And so I respected him immensely for that. That was an unbelievable lesson for me personally, and how to run an organization. There were many breakthroughs that came out of that 1998 Ohio State game. For many different people on many different levels. For me, I learned respect, I learned humility, and Coach Saban has been very public, especially recently, about how that particular game is when he went from a transactional leader to a transformational leader. And the breakthroughs that occurred that day were substantial. Just like in sports, I think that the breakthroughs that need to happen in business are very difficult, because today's business environment is very fast-paced. It's very high pressure, just like sports is. And in order to have those breakthroughs, there's a lot of different things that have to happen. A lot of breakthroughs that business professionals need to experience, those don't just come by way of a new strategy or a bigger title. They actually come by way of a stronger you. And in order to have those breakthroughs, there's certain things that need to occur. And I believe that the foundation of any breakthrough is actually fortitude. And fortitude is defined as the strength of mind. And Coach Saban preached that fortitude and that mental toughness every single day. When I made my first start at Michigan State, and I remember it distinctly, I dropped back on one particular pass play, and somebody missed a block. I'm not going to mention any names. There's not a guy sitting in the room right now that could potentially have missed a block. No, I think Paul wasn't on the team yet, so this is before his time. But the lights went out, and I went right to the turf. Got knocked out, and physically I felt like I was dying. I really did. I had just gotten the wind knocked out of me, but as the lights went out and I started to refocus and they came back on, the head trainer helped me up off the turf and actually smiled at me because he had been around for several years. And he just looked at me and he said, "Welcome to the Big Ten, kid." So I was helped off the field, but Coach Saban would actually talk to me about that specific incident later on. And he talked to me about how, even though it felt like I was physically dying, that mental toughness in those situations had to win out. For a couple of reasons. Number one, because my teammates at that time when I'm on the turf, they're looking at me and they're wondering how I'm going to respond as the leader of the offense and as the leader of the team. And number two, and more importantly, the defense actually looking at me and gaining confidence when they see me laying on the turf. So it was another, one of many, but another very important lesson from the guy that taught me all about mental toughness. So in the work that I do now, I talk to people about how fortitude really is made up of 9 distinct drivers. And the first one is focus. Outcomes can be distractions. And so when we focus on clarity, that clarity cuts through all of the chaos. The second one is ownership. I believe that chasing the best version of ourselves is not a luxury. It's actually a responsibility that we all have. The next one is resilience. That seems obvious, but we have to not just be surprised when we're hit with adversity, we actually have to expect it. The second one is time. Our relationship with time is so important, and it can be the difference between going from good to great to elite. The next one is inner voices. You know, our subconscious runs 85% of what we do every single day. So the question I have is, what stories are you telling yourself about yourself? The next one is teams. I know one thing, I've been on teams my entire life, and nobody wins alone. I'm sure there are many of you in this room that understand that as well. The next one is understanding emotion. If Coach Saban had not let me slide with that incident during that 1998 game, I would have never learned the concept of standards over feelings. Standards, personal standards, and also standards that are organizational. Because standards over feelings is one of the most important things that we can adhere to in business and sports. That way we don't get too euphoric after a win, like the win over Ohio State, or too devastated after a big loss. The next one is discipline. Coach Saban and a lot of other famous thought leaders have used the quote, "If you can handle the pain of discipline, you'll never have to deal with the pain of disappointment." And finally, execution. None of the other stuff matters unless we are executing and taking massive action. Not just on our to-do list, but on those uncomfortable things that we know we have to do in order to push ourselves to our next level. So tell me if this has ever happened to you. So you're watching your favorite football team, right? Whether it's the Spartans, whether it's the Detroit Lions. We know there's no other college football fans of any other teams. So you sit down at the stadium, or you sit down on the couch, and you've got your favorite people with you, you've got your favorite snacks with you, and you're all excited, you're all hopeful about what's going to happen in that game. and then the offense sputters. They can't get anything going. They can't complete a pass. They can't get a first down. They certainly can't score through no fault of the quarterback, of course. And you're looking at your family and your friends and you're saying, what is going on? And then finally, with about less than 2 minutes to go in the half or less than 2 minutes to go in the game, they finally put it all together. They go right down the field. It looks easy. They punch it in for a score. There's no hesitation. There's no huddle. No problems. And you look at your family and your friends and you say, where has that been all day? Why haven't they been doing that the whole game? What's the difference? Well, I got a little story for you that I'll close with. About 10 years ago, I went in to have some minor surgery. I had a hernia in my abdomen, and it needed to be repaired. So had the surgery. A couple of days after the surgery, I needed to go get a scan to make sure everything looked good. And then a couple of days after that, I had a voicemail on my phone from my doctor. I pushed play on that message, and my brain immediately started to filter through all the unimportant words that he was saying. And I was looking for just one word. And it's a word that I did not want to hear, but there it was. He said, Bill, everything looks good with the hernia repair, but the radiologist found an aneurysm on your aorta. And I'll tell you the feeling that I had inside my body at that point. I honestly felt like I had less than 2 minutes to go in my game, and I was way behind on the scoreboard. And that is not a feeling that I ever want to feel again. However, it drives me to this day because it forces me to always be asking myself, and it's a question that I'll ask you as well, are you playing to win, or are you just running out the clock? And to use a cheesy sports analogy, I don't want to ever feel like I'm leaving anything on the field when it's all over for me. So to wrap up, why do we love sports? We love sports for a lot of the same reasons that we love business. I think sports allow us to understand that our limitations are not restricted by our talents or our luck or even our circumstances. But our personal limitations are only capped by what we are courageous enough to attempt in our lives. I think we love sports because, as I said earlier, they remind us that greatness is not just for a select few, but it's within reach for each and every one of us. And I also believe that we love sports because it gives us the opportunity to answer one last question. Do I have what it takes? So I urge you and I challenge you to relentlessly pursue the answer to that question. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it so much. Thank you.
My name is Kiko Duckett, played Michigan State. I want to ask you, when did you know that your football career was over? And what was your transition and was it difficult?
Very good question, Tico. I wrote a whole book about that exact thing.
I haven't read it yet.
I got a quick story for you. So I went and signed as a free agent with the New York Giants, right? And so I was just an extra arm in camp, and I was laying in my hotel room after one of the preseason games, and I was in a dead sleep, and on the nightstand next to me was an old landline phone, and the phone rang at 8 o'clock and woke me up, and the guy on the other end said, Bill, Coach wants to see you at the stadium, and bring your playbook. And if you know football, you know what bring the playbook means. It means you're being released. So I went over to the stadium, and I was greeted there in the building, and I was asked to go up to Coach's office. And the whole conversation lasted about 60 seconds. It really wasn't a conversation, but he stood up, he gave me a couple encouraging words and a handshake, and he sent me on my way. And I walked back down the steps, and I thought, I'll go through the locker room, grab a memento out of my locker, just something to remember or remind myself of how far I've come. And the entire locker was completely cleaned out. So when I was sleeping in that hotel room, there was a staff hard at work making sure there was no evidence of me ever having been on that team. And that was a second punch in the gut for sure. So that was a very big indicator that my end was coming. And I had a couple more tryouts after that, but nothing really materialized. And then I realized that I would have to make some major changes in my life. And the transition certainly was not difficult, and I know there's a lot of athletes out there who are suffering with that because it's such a big part of your identity. It's what I did for 16 years, and you know, I was on national TV in Spartan Stadium, 75,000 people, and to go from that to, you know, back to reality is not the easiest thing. And I'll tell you, one of the most difficult parts of it is when you're playing, there's a whole team, a whole staff of people trying to make sure that you're successful. And then when your eligibility is gone, and it's understandable, but at that point, all of those people have disappeared. They're not as interested in helping you with the rest of your life, right? They've got to go on to the next crop. So that was very difficult to handle and to deal with. And there aren't as many resources, or weren't in those days, that there are now, and there wasn't as much awareness around this issue. But that's why I wanted to write the book, just to give any athletes out there a little bit of hope who might be struggling.
So in other words, he knows exactly what his career was going.
Bill, I want to go back to your story about Nick Saban holding you accountable after that Ohio State game. You took that as a positive, but a lot of college athletes can be pretty pissed off. I just want to game when you bumped you on the sideline, whatever. You didn't play in an era where that college athlete could think, well, hey, I can switch to another school and I could have millions of bucks waiting for me, you know, if I go somewhere else. Talk a little bit, if you would, about your own personal opinions on the world we live in today with the transfer portal and NIL and so forth.
Yeah, great question. I just saw a video the other day about somebody that played at Alabama for Saban was telling a story about how he wasn't getting enough playing time, or Saban chewed him out on the sideline, and he actually, you know, didn't handle it well, and he was throwing a little bit of a fit, and actually said, you know, he's out of here, he quits, he's going to transfer. And I thought, wow, immediately my first thought was, so you get chewed out by your coach, and your first thought is to transfer somewhere else. I'm a little concerned about that. I would have concerns about that individual, and I know things are different these days, but I come from, you know, the old school, and there was hardly any transferring at that point. And, you know, getting chewed out by your coach was just part of the whole process of developing that resilience and that grit. And I actually got to a point, because I was a little immature my freshman year as well, but I actually got to a point, and the other athletes in the room I'm sure would echo this, that I started to take pride in being able to handle criticism and handle getting knocked down, literally and figuratively. And I think that's where a lot of our success collectively comes from, when we can develop that skill as an individual, but also when we're 100 people together doing that at the same time, then you kind of become unstoppable. So I'm with you. I think I don't love everything about the state of where we are right now, but I think we need some strong voices to help with that.
Bill, did you bring any of your books with you?
I did not. Apologies. It's available on Amazon if anybody's interested, or contact me, and we'll have a chat.
Well, and I was going to say, if you're here today, I would recommend. I read it, and it appears at first take to be written for ex-athletes, but it's written for all of us. Because the same principles that you alluded to apply to our businesses. If you want a book and you want it autographed, bring your card up here, leave it at my table, we'll make sure somebody.
Yeah, we'll get you taken care of.
You get it, okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Good. Bill, thanks so much for sharing.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
All right, once again, these events don't happen without our sponsors. Please look at the program on your table. Do business with them, support them like they have been doing us. And of course, we're talking about Fly Lansing. We're talking about Shaheen Chevrolet Cadillac, Dean Transportation, Sinair, Foster Swift Attorneys, LAFQ, Lansing Sports Commission, PNC Bank, TriStar, Trust Bank, and of course, WLNS Channel 6. And thanks, Ian, for being here today. We appreciate it very much. All right, I also want to thank my team who puts this thing together. Congratulations. Sarah Mosier, Ben Robinson, Caitlin Mosier, Jimmy Green, Jeffrey Mosier. I know this sounds like a family reunion, and to an extent it is. I want to thank once again to all of you for coming out and supporting the MBN Speakers events. Now our next event is we're gonna go back to one of those kind of tutelage things. Our next event will be on artificial intelligence, and it will be right here next month on Thursday, June 19th, so make sure you get into that, and it'll be in this Friendship Hall. Once again, don't forget about the quick surveys that are on your table, or you can pick them up on your QR code, and fill out not only the surveys, but look at our events and visit our website. And while you're here at the airport, check in about TSA and the pre-check, as we said. Meanwhile, we built in some more networking time. And Bill, once again, thanks so much for being here today. Appreciate it. All right, so until June 19th, everybody, thanks for your support. Have a prosperous month.